In August 1838, apprenticeship ends and legal slavery disappears from Jamaica. Former apprentices are no longer bound to estates. They are free in law to choose employers, move, and organize family life without owner permission. This change is presented by the colonial state as the completion of reform. It is framed as the final step in a controlled transition from bondage to citizenship. The plantation system remains. What changes is the legal basis of labor. For the British government, full emancipation is not an experiment. It is a calculation. Apprenticeship has produced conflict, court congestion, and political embarrassment. It has failed to stabilize labor while claiming moral progress. Ending it early removes a visible contradiction between freedom and compulsion. It also transfers responsibility for labor relations from imperial design to colonial practice. While it declares freedom, management must make it work. On the estates, emancipation is immediate but uneven. Work routines continue the next morning. Cane must still be cut. Mills must still run. Housing remains tied to plantations. Food plots remain on estate land. Employers expect labor to resume under contract. Workers expect change in conditions and pay. Both sides enter the new system with different interpretations of what freedom means. For planters, freedom means the end of ownership, but not the end of authority. They assume labor will remain available because people have nowhere else to go. Land is scarce outside estates. Towns offer little work. Markets are controlled by plantation output. Employers attempt to reproduce discipline through wages, contracts, and eviction threats. The whip is replaced by the threat of hunger and homelessness. For free people, freedom means the right to refuse work, to choose tasks, and to protect family life. Many reduce working hours. Some leave estates to settle on marginal land or in villages. Others negotiate higher wages or different duties. Movement increases. Work becomes conditional rather than automatic. Time becomes a subject of bargaining. This shift disrupts plantation calculations. Mills require coordinated labor at fixed moments. Cane spoils if not processed quickly. When workers refuse overtime or delay harvests, production falters. Planters complain that labor is unreliable and expensive. They interpret this as laziness rather than negotiation. Conflict moves from courts to contracts. The colonial government responds by attempting to structure freedom. Vagrancy laws are enforced to compel employment. Taxes are imposed that can only be paid in cash, pushing people toward wage labor. Police replace plantation punishments as the visible arm of control. Authority moves outward from estates into public regulation. Land becomes the central issue. Without access to independent land, freedom depends on wages set by employers. Small plots are scarce and expensive. Planters resist selling productive land. Free people acquire marginal or interior parcels where possible. Villages grow near estates and along roads. These settlements reduce dependence on plantation housing and increase bargaining power. Religious and mutual aid institutions expand. Churches become centers of education and organization. Schools spread literacy. Burial societies and savings clubs form. These networks reduce reliance on estate provision and create social life outside plantation schedules. Authority over time and movement weakens. Planters attempt to stabilize the labor force through contracts that tie workers to estates for fixed periods. They import indentured labor from elsewhere in the empire to reduce dependence on local workers. They lobby for laws that criminalize breach of contract. They seek to convert freedom into predictability. The economy adjusts slowly. Sugar remains dominant but faces competition from beet sugar and other colonies. Prices fluctuate. Some estates fail. Others consolidate. Labor costs rise. Output becomes less certain. The plantation system survives, but its margins narrow. For free people, emancipation does not produce equality. Wages are low, work is seasonal, housing remains insecure. Courts often favor employers. But the meaning of labor changes. Work is no longer proof of ownership. It becomes a transaction. Even when terms are unequal, the relationship is different. Family life becomes more stable. Marriage is recognized. Children are less likely to be sold away. Naming practices and burial rites continue without owner permission. Cultural life expands outside plantation oversight. These changes do not remove poverty. They alter control. Violence declines as a daily instrument of discipline. Punishment shifts to eviction, arrest, and debt. The body is no longer legally owned, but it is still regulated. Authority becomes procedural rather than personal. Coercion is embedded in law rather than in whips. The state presents emancipation as a success. It points to continued production and relative order. It claims that gradualism has worked. For abolitionists, emancipation proves that slavery can end without destroying the economy. For planters, it proves that labor can still be extracted without ownership. Each side finds evidence for its argument. What emancipation ends is property in people. What it leaves intact is property in land and capital. These determine who sets terms of work. Freedom arrives without redistribution. The old hierarchy loses its legal name but retains much of its structure. By the early 1840s, Jamaica is no longer a slave society, but it is not yet a free labor society in balance. It is a place where contracts replace commands and scarcity replaces chains. Control operates through access to land, wages, and law. Emancipation, therefore, marks a change in form rather than a collapse of the plantation system. It removes the right to own bodies. It does not remove the power to shape lives. Authority becomes indirect. Inequality becomes legal. The formal end of slavery closes one chapter of Jamaican history and opens another. The plantation survives by adapting. The free population survives by negotiating. Neither side fully controls the outcome. The system continues, but under new rules. In 1838, slavery ends as a legal category. Dependence remains as an economic condition. Freedom enters Jamaica not as a rupture, but as a rearrangement of power.